Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our first episode of 2026. And wow, a huge crowd. So either everybody's excited to be back for work in 2026 or Kathryn just has a ton of friends, which is probably the latter. But before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast. I hope everybody had just a wonderful holiday and are ready to get back to work because 2026 is going to be the biggest year ever for the fiber broadband industry. I could not be more excited. In Washington, Congress is officially back in session, and both the House and Senate are kicking off the year at a fast pace with a major government funding deadline looming on January 30th. This week, lawmakers are expected to take up 3-bill funding package, which will include the Interior and Environmental, Energy, Water, Development, and Commerce, Justice, and Science, which includes funding $51 million to fund NTIA through September 30th of the year. And the appropriations package directs NTIA to update appropriators on its plans and timelines for spending the remaining BEAD funds within 30 days of enactment of this bill to ensure that all BEAD programs grants comply with the IIJ ban on rate regulation. Ahead of the holiday recess, we want to note that Representatives Andy Barr and Hal Rogers introduced the House companion to the Success for BEAD Act, providing guidance on the BEAD non-deployment funds. So FBA is very supportive of this legislation. On the NTIA BEAD front, 53 out of 56 states and territories have submitted their final proposals for NTIA review. And as of near the end of the year last year, NTIA had approved final proposals for 37 of the 56 states and territories. So finally, we're starting to get there. So the Fiber Broadband Association will be kicking off our regional Fiber Connect workshops in Oklahoma City on Thursday, February 5th at the O'Connor Resort with a focus on tribal broadband. You're not going to want to miss that. And after our tribal broadband regional event, we'll be in Washington, D.C. on February 24th and 25th for our Public Policy Summit and D.C. fly-in. This has always been an amazing event for our members to engage with Congress and the administration and key agencies, such as the FCC and NTIA. So I look forward to seeing you there. And last week on Fiber for Breakfast, on New Year's Eve, our guest was the Fiber Broadband Association's 2026 chairwoman, Ash Brown, who discussed her plans and vision for the Fiber Broadband Association and our industry for this coming year. So if you missed that session, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is Kathryn de Wit, the director of the Pew Charitable Trusts Broadband Access Initiative, to discuss New Year, New Connections, BEAD meets forward in 2026. So Kathryn directs Pew's Broadband Access Initiative, which works to accelerate efforts to connect millions of Americans to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. In addition to working with policymakers, researchers, and other stakeholders to improve policy outcomes, DeWitt's work also includes addressing research gaps and bringing together stakeholders for data-driven discussions about how to ensure that every American benefits from universal connectivity. Before joining Pew, Kathryn was an associate with Booz Allen Hamilton, where she focused on broadband deployment, organizational management, and public affairs. She's also a senior fellow with the Heinz Endowment, leading projects on youth philanthropy and community engagement. Kathryn holds a bachelor's degree in communications and sociology from Penn State and a master's in public administration from the University of Pittsburgh. Welcome, Kathryn. Always great to see you. Glad to have you here. And for our audience, please type in your questions. And we're already starting to get questions, so great. Yeah. So type in your questions and we'll work those into the discussion. So Happy New Year, Kathryn. Glad to see you always.
Happy New Year, Gary.
Yeah. Can we start off with a little bit about, Pew Charitable Trusts and its mission? Like, what is this all about?
Sure. So Pew, thank you again for having me. First episode of the year. I'm honored. And it is going to be a big year. So I'm excited to come and talk to you all about that. For those who aren't familiar with Pew, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization. So God love you, Gary, for reading that long bio. But what Gary said is true. My job and those of my colleagues here is to bring data and research to help policymakers solve complex challenges. And my team has been focused on broadband since 2018. And states in particular really sit at the core of Pew's work, not just the broadband portfolio. And we work closely with state legislators, governors, officials all across the country, again, on issues from fiscal health to environmental protection and housing. My team started its work in 2018, working on a research project to understand what states were doing on the digital divide. How are they focusing on deployment? And that research led to much of the work that we do with state officials today, including on BEAD.
Oh, fantastic. So tell me a little bit about Betty. What is that, and how is that still going on, and you guys still engaged with all the SBOs?
Yeah, still going on. Thank you. That's a peer learning network for state broadband offices. One thing that a lot of folks don't realize is, unless you have the good fortune of being steeped in this day to day, is that there is no professional association for state broadband officials. So when the American Rescue Plan Act was passed and the Capital Projects Fund was established, all of a sudden, more than half the states were standing up new broadband offices and looking for help and support and guidance. Where do we go? What do we do? And then the infrastructure bill passed shortly thereafter. So since August of 2021, Pew has been working, running this program called Betty. It's the Broadband Education and Training Initiative. And it really is a peer learning network for these state broadband offices. And we do custom research, analysis, and really it's honestly, Gary, it's about providing support for these really brilliant and scrappy public officials to learn from one another and share information and have a space to really come up with creative and relevant solutions that will work for their communities. So we'll continue doing that work in the years to come. I think it will be very important as BEAD rolls out. And we also use the work that we do through Betty. It informs our research that we do generally on universal access. It led to the research that we did on workforce and permitting, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And then we also do a lot of time educating public officials, just helping legislators, governors understand what the what is with BEAD and why broadband deployment is challenging and what their state offices need to be successful.
Awesome. I mean, the one thing I can say about BEAD, the one thing it has done is create a state broadband office in all 56 states and territories. And I have to say my experience, we go around the country in our regional events. We always have the state broadband office there, and usually the governor or someone from the governor's office. And every state broadband office that we work with has been amazing. These guys work their tails off and just do an amazing job. So I know that when I talk to state broadband directors, the biggest challenge is to know what's going on, and they really lean on you and your organization to kind of help connect them with all the other offices. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Thank you. That's incredibly kind. Yes, they do. The directors and their staff really do work with us and use that space for two things. I think one is just, again, that information sharing between practitioners. You know how important just being able to sit down and say, okay, here's what I'm hearing. What are you hearing? What do we do about it? But it's also creating spaces for folks in certain roles like grants management or permitting, those staff level functions that really benefit from learning for one another. They all kind of break off into their own little cohorts and then can trade practices and approaches in that way. And I think to your point, it's been really exciting to see the growth of state broadband offices and staff over the last few years. And I don't mean growth in like the size, although let's be clear, broadband offices need to be a certain size in order to administer all these funds well. And according to policy, but just the technical expertise that they're building, their fluency in matters of deployment and adoption and digital skilling, and the ideas coming out of these offices to solve some of the longstanding issues for deployment and, again, adoption, affordability. It's really exciting. And I think that BEAD is going to offer us a unique opportunity to learn both about improving policy outcomes, but how do we really approach universal access, deploying high-speed, affordable, reliable internet that's going to last decades in the future? How do we do that well? How do we do that in a way that serves the public good and constituent needs, while also working very closely with the private sector to ensure that those bottom lines are met? And we are, I think, standing on the precipice of a really important moment in research, which you can tell that's what I do for a living, but also in policy and thinking about where do we go from here? Because the landscape is going to look different in 4 years than it does today.
All right. So, back, 50 months ago, 50 months ago, when the IIJA was signed into law,
So really
there was
50 months.
50 months, right?
Wow.
That's a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So there was 15.2 million unserved and underserved locations. And so then when we finally got around to the benefit of the bargain round, we ended up with 4.2 million. So programs like Joey Wender's Treasury Capital Projects Fund, they got $10 billion out the door with 4 people, and ARPA and private investment. We've been able to get 11 million of these locations served before BEAD even has a shovel in the ground. So is BEAD still a big deal? I mean, should we even care about?
I'm sorry, I'm smiling because this question comes up so often. And the answer is yes. It matters for a few reasons. And the first is, you of all people and your members know that the folks who are currently left offline and unserved, they're the hardest and most expensive to reach. When we're talking about the business case for connecting unserved Americans, this is why this infusion of public capital is critical, because otherwise there is no business case to connect these households. And to your point, where we have seen over the last several years where that infusion of public funds can really accelerate build out and incentivize the deployment of connections that are going to last longer and be more useful in the future. And I think that actually, I'll just stop there. Yes, yes, it is still important.
Well, certainly, we're excited that we're finally have final approvals out there. One of the questions from the audience is, okay, NIST. We saw last year at this time, we had 3 states approved, and we thought we were going to move forward, and then they got hung up on NIST. So the question is, will NIST start approving more states now?
Ooh, that is not necessarily a question for me, but rather our partners in the public sector and the federal level. I think, though, the point is, one, people actually know that NIST is involved. And I think that I flag this not to be pedantic, but rather I think that one of the differences, and I think one of the advantages of where we are today versus 5 years ago, is that folks have more fluency in this issue. They have more lawmakers, partners in the private sector, advocates, researchers. They understand deployment and universal access and policy very differently than they did 5 years ago. That's a good thing. So the fact that someone is saying and asking a question about NIST, can we expect NIST to move faster? I don't really think that's a question many people would have thought to bring up on a podcast like this 5 years ago. All that to say, what I hope we will focus on in the years to come is this public pressure, making sure that, because we've got 4 years to build. Once all the documents are signed, and there are several documents, we could talk about those, it's a 4-year construction deadline. And in order for that 4-year deadline to be met, everything has to work in sequence and be on time. So we need to make sure that states, the private sector, communities are working at the table with federal partners and NTIA, all working together to say, this is what's working, this is what's not working, how do we solve it? So I think that this is my roundabout way of saying, I hope that NIST will continue to approve things quickly. But I think the more public attention and accountability and that we can draw to some of these procedural barriers or procedural delays, that's not what I'm calling NIST right now, just generally, the better off we'll be and the more likely we'll be able to deploy all of those funds on time. and according to plan.
Actually, I asked this question to Assistant Secretary Roth last time I saw her last month. And, because this time last year, Vineet from Louisiana was calling me up like, Gary, how do I get this NIST approved? No one even knew that NIST had to approve, when you go look through say, oh, yeah, NIST has to approve the commerce stuff. It was more of a surprise, but that was really to kind of hold things up. And what Assistant Secretary Ross said is that the NIST approvals will go very, very quick because everybody's aligned. The Secretary of Commerce, Ludnick, is, this is his plan. This is things need to move forward. So I don't think we'll see any problems with NIST approvals. And, we already seen states that are getting ready to put shovels in the ground. So interesting question. Here's another, I'll call it red herring. All right. So right before the holidays, the GAO decision on B337604 came out and basically said procedural error on the way we did the benefit of, or Commerce did benefit the bargain. I have my opinion on what that means, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't. I think it's important for Congress to know that was released, but no, I don't have an answer on that right now.
Yeah. So of course, as soon as that came out, the concern was, is this going to hold everything up? Or we're going to have to redo everything. And our assessment is this was kind of a Commerce to just say, whoops, and just file the, paperwork and so forth. Because I don't think there's any appetite by the administration or Congress to slow down this BEAD deployment. We're already year 5 and we need to move forward. So anyway, so I think that's something not to worry about.
Yeah, Gary, I think you're hitting on both in that and talking about NIST as well. There is bipartisan support for this program to get moving, and there's a political interest here as well. I mean, I think your members probably know this better than most. Like, constituents care about broadband. I mean, state and local officials, Christine Hallquist from the state director for Vermont ran on broadband when she was running for governor. So, there is a political motivation here for the funds to get moving and shovels in the ground as quickly as possible. So I would agree with you that there's little appetite for continued delay.
It's great, though, that we all are starting to learn these little tiny obscure, things like the GAOs and NIST and so forth. But yeah, we've been living BEAD way too long. So another question, I'll take this one, but it's, all right, how can we be sure that 2026 is going to be a great year for fiber? And they said, we believed this in the past, didn't happen. What's different now than a couple of years ago? And I mean, I can tell you that, I've been modeling fiber deployment and looking at, my model basically said that we can get to about 12 million homes passed per year, and then we'll run into a little bit of supply chain, but more workforce development because we can't grow the workforce fast enough. We hit 11.8 million homes passed last year, and this was largely private investment. The federal and state funding, the government funding is just a small part, less than 10% of the overall CapEx for fiber. And it's been going crazy, and now fueled by AI infrastructure. And again, another huge initiative for the administration. And so fiber is going to be, we're going to blow past, so we grew over 10%, about 11% last year. We've been growing at about that rate for the last few years. And so we are definitely going to blow through my model for 2026. And it's really exciting. And that's what we've really seen is, so one of the things the administration did do is, whether you think the one big, beautiful bill, good, bad, ugly, it did have a tax provision and provided 100% bonus depreciation, which is created about $4 to $5 billion of private investment free cash flow for fiber, just for fiber in that. And we saw AT&T immediately sign up for another 1 million homes per year pass. Of their getting to now 64 million homes passed with fiber. And again, it's just that had really helped fuel private investment. So with that, let's get back to Kathryn. And all right, so let's talk about there's some questions about, are we going to get, how many states do you think will actually receive their funds in 2026?
I think we're on track for full approval. We don't have any indication that the states won't receive their deployment funds. I think the outstanding question is what happens with non-deployment. Again, I think that there is a role for all of us to play to continue to talk about the importance of getting the deployment funds out the door everywhere across all 50 states, and continue to communicate the demand for the funding and the need for that funding. But I think the question of non-deployment funding is the open one now, and not only when those are deployed and distributed, but also under what conditions.
So, it wasn't too long ago, there was a big question was, were there really going to be non-deployment funds? And I think, a lot of people were panicking about some kind of clawback or something like that. But, my view, and I don't know if you share this, is that non-deployment funds are going to happen. The Commerce is committed to deploying that other 20, whatever it is, 21, $22 billion for non-deployment. Do you share that view?
I do. I think the question, as with everything, the devil's in the details. I think, like many states, governors, state legislators, and members of Congress would have preferred for, those funds to be the clear use of those funds to be defined now, for states to be able to plan alongside for implementation of those funds alongside the deployment dollars. But I agree. I think that I think Commerce sees the value in non-deployment, and particularly as it relates to priorities like AI, digital skills training, workforce, hopefully, fingers crossed. And all of those things are just going to extend the impact of this investment, make sure that those networks are viable, really position communities for, I really hate saying the technology-enabled economy because everything is technology-enabled these days, but really help position economies for, to remain competitive, or communities to remain competitive in today's economy. But I think, again, like it is, we hope that there is more specificity on the use of those non-deployment funds soon, and we're glad to see that governors all across the country, including Governor Landry, Governor Youngkin, have expressed their support for use of these funds. A bipartisan cohort of Congress, as you mentioned, has also, expressed their support. So let's keep it a priority, people.
Well, absolutely. And, in meeting with NTIA and Assistant Secretary Roth, certainly, and she's said this publicly, that permitting reform, if you look at how do we accelerate, because all these states have to meet a very short deadline to be able to get all this money deployed. And, you look at every project, whether it's broadband or anything, having, permitting is such a long pole in the tent. And so I'm very bullish on NTIA's ability to, implement some permitting reform. I know we worked together, Kathryn, on our permitting summit, and put together those recommendations to Congress. We're going to continue that work to really streamline permitting, and I think there's a great opportunity to do that. The other, as I mentioned, long pole in the tent is workforce. We've been fortunate that we stood up a fiber optic technician program called Optic Path, and now we have over 1,300 graduates, and that's accelerating as we work to get that program in all 56 states and territories. But, there's lots of job codes. We have not only this huge demand and deployment, but we have a retiring workforce. And so, those two things really mean that we need to put a lot of people to work, get a lot of people trained. So hopefully, we'll be able to leverage workforce development. What other uses do you see, Kathryn, for non-deployment funds?
Well, I certainly agree with you on those two, and those were two needs that states also identified. So setting up, technical assistance in state and local government to help ISPs and their colleagues in the public sector address permitting needs. And I think I appreciate, Gary, you kind of went this direction already, but adding specificity to what we mean by the permitting issue or the workforce issue. because a lot of folks say, oh, permitting, and just kind of throw their hands up and move on. And our question, as it has been for you as well, is, okay, but what do we mean by that? Is it federal? Is it state? Is it local? Where's the roadblock? Is it a headcount issue? You don't have enough people to approve permits? Is this a paperwork issue? But I think really digging into those questions will be critical in the coming years, but also, one of the reasons why non-deployment funds to support some of those learning processes and the systems to alleviate the barriers would be really helpful. Agree on workforce. It's not just fiber splicers. It's folks who can drive trucks. It's construction writ large. It's marketing to help folks adopt the network. The other uses we've heard really, you can, I think, kind of lump them together under it's uses of the network itself. So that's cybersecurity training, it's digital skills training, including helping workers adapt to AI. It's telehealth uses. So it really is, again, kind of extending the reach of this investment and ensuring that communities don't just have these connections available, but the economic and health and educational benefits are following alongside them.
The other area that we're seeing is, the administration's really pressing on getting AI and AI infrastructure out the door. And as everybody on this call knows, fiber, there's a huge demand for fiber for AI, building out, connecting data centers. And what's great about that infrastructure is it delivers middle mile, delivers long haul fiber, and it also enables communities to now have more cell towers, so improve their mobile broadband, but also public safety with cameras and so forth, and smart grid modernization. So by getting more fiber out for AI infrastructure is definitely a great, investment for those non-deployment, we'll call them non-deployment, but do deployment of fiber infrastructure for AI. And just the economic development impact of that is huge. Do you guys agree with that?
Absolutely. I think the connection, I want to pull exactly what you just said so we could adapt that quote, because I think exactly how you just explained it, helping folks understand the connection between the fiber build out and AI and public safety, that connection is not always there. Folks, sometimes you really need to help, you need to draw that line. So policymakers and other folks understand, you really do need this fiber to be out in the ground for these other needs and purposes. Like you can't update public safety, you can't update the grid unless you have that robust fiber backbone there. And AI, thankfully, gives us a really easy way to describe that. But that is one thing that I worry about at times is we can't lose sight of what needs to be built, even as we are thinking ahead for AI and all of these other applications in the future.
One of the questions that here I'll take is, what are we going to do about a potential fiber shortage slowing down the pace of fiber deployment? It seems to be that's talked about a lot on the ground. So just to kind of peel this back, there's manufacturers that actually make the glass, that draw the glass, and then that's resold to a number of companies that actually put it into the fiber cables. So while AI is taking a huge amount of fiber, the BEAD requirements actually don't come off the back end, but they are the first that are prioritized. And if you look at BEAD is for rural, low density areas. And so that would be cabled in something called loose tube. And so when we look at loose tube, there's a lot of availability, more than enough for addressing all the BEAD requirements. Where there is long lead times, it's on what's called ribbon cable. And that is, for what we're seeing for more high density applications like AI. Now, some companies like to just standardize on one type of fiber make it easier. But again, these are things that we look at every day. We have a supply chain working group. We meet with all the fiber manufacturers to make things stay on track. So I think we're in pretty good shape, but there's certainly, what I told NTIA is when we went from kind of a nice ramp to a shotgun start with all 56 states and territories kind of starting at once, that does give a shock to the supply chain. But our studies show that, we had this huge surplus where everybody was hoarding fiber coming out of COVID. Then service providers stopped buying and worked that inventory down. Now we're at equilibrium, so we're at a good spot to start. All right, well, let me just make sure I hit anything before we have to exit here, because I know that. So one of the questions is, why can't operators use their BEAD funds for operations versus just deployment?
Statute. The law, it's been explicit that these are for capital expenditures and not operating expenditures.
All right. Well, we have a ton of questions, but let's just close on two things. One, I want to hear your New Year's resolution. And two, I want to hear what you're most optimistic about in 2026.
Gary, are we going to trade like lifting notes right now? We talk about strength training, the resolution for 2026, I think for everybody. We've got a big year ahead of us for my team at Pew. So my resolution is really feeling good about that rollout of new work and making sure that we're keep maintaining our focus, which is the support for the states and strength training, as I mentioned. I think what am I feeling optimistic about? We're moving forward. I think that the last 12 months have been filled with a lot of uncertainty and changes. But NTIA is approving state plans. NIST is approving things. And states actually are poised to break grounds on projects this year. That is really exciting. And despite the changes and a lot of the concern when those changes were announced, we know that the majority of locations that will be funded by BEAD will receive fiber. This is a big deal. It means that we are going to narrow the availability gap in ways that we have not been able to contemplate. So I'm very optimistic about that. I think I'm very optimistic about state leadership. I mean, we talked about this at the top, but states are engaged in ways that they haven't been before. And they want to solve the availability challenge because they need it for all of those economic development needs. They experience these gaps in a way, I think, differently than a lot of us in DC understand. They understand the economic imperative. And SBOs, they just keep doing the work. The directors and their teams, they're just fighting for connectivity. Even as those new challenges and opportunities emerge, they're rolling with it. And I am constantly impressed by their creativity, their technical expertise, and their savvy. So trust the states, and we can all work together to get this over the finish line.
Well, Kathryn, as always, I love talking with you. Love your insights. I love the support. I love everything you do and your group does to support the SBOs. And speaking of state broadband offices, next Wednesday, we have our good friend Brandy Ritter, the executive director of the Colorado State Broadband Office, going to be here to discuss from strategy to sustainability, Colorado's broadband approach to reliability and reach. Just spent my holiday skiing in Colorado with no snow. So I'm anxious to see what Brandy has to say. And Kathryn, I can't wait to see you at our conference. I can't wait for our conference. The guys have really pulled out all the stops. It's going to be so huge and so awesome, especially the AI Infrastructure Summit that's going to be hosted by my favorite quantum physicist, Michio Kaku. So I hope you guys are there in Orlando in May. Kathryn, I look forward to seeing you in DC here in probably next week.
I hope so, Gary.
You guys soon.
Thank you again for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.